You know, you got to feel a bit sorry for a poor old Albo. A tinge of sadness for Albo, because here he was trying to get his message on shrinkflation across. Have you ever found more air than chips in your chip packet? That kind of thing, The attack on Woolies and Coles, which is good public interest stuff, but of course, totally drowned out by terror. And of course, what has turned out to be even a bigger scam than we even thought, AUKUS and the little petty revenge plot against the French Prime Minister, which was behind it, which was the foundation of AUKUS. And there was Peter Dutton out demanding the Parliament be recalled while Albo's on his shrinkflation mission. The Parliament be recalled to invoke new terror laws to start deporting people for flying yellow flags, these terrorist supporters. Oh, he loves a bit of terrorism, as do the Murdoch press. His valiant supporters in the Murdoch press, the greatest lovers of terror and war, the greatest warmongers around. But we've got to hand it to Boris. What a story. Cat is out of the bag. Yes, it was Boris Johnson who was the reason for AUKUS. It came out in Boris's memoirs. And what had happened here was that he wanted to get revenge on Emmanuel Macron because Macron had done something nasty to him about Brexit. The irony being that Brexit is the UK's version of AUKUS, a complete and total disaster that everybody would love to reverse. Everybody with any brains, but they can't. It's too late. Brexit is the UK's AUKUS. In any case, it says in the memoir that Boris convinced Australia, that is our ScoMo, to dump the $5 billion French submarines contract and go with AUKUS and UK and US submarines. No consultation from ScoMokio, but dopey ScoMo happily blew up the French. Macron even called him a liar. I don't think he's a liar, I know he's a liar, said Macron. And in turn, ScoMo stitched up Labor and Albo and the troops. Then in opposition, it gave them 24 hours to side with AUKUS or to be wedged as chicken hawks that didn't want to join this grand new American alliance with the Brits. So it was that Albo was wedged, and now we've been scammed in a $380 billion scam because UK former Prime Minister Boris Johnson wanted to get revenge on Emmanuel Macron. And here was Malcolm Turnbull out this week saying he loves it because the French deal was his deal. And Malcolm was out saying he doubted whether Australia would even get one nuclear sub out of it. Such a bad deal, of course, that we're burying their nuclear waste gratis in Australia somewhere at sites to be determined for free. And we're off to war with China. American bases, military bases popping up everywhere for the next war with China. But of course, the Middle East has thwarted those Chinese let's go to war with China to defend the US dollar hegemony plans because the Middle East is completely blowing up with psycho turbocharged nutjob Netanyahu invading Lebanon and just killing more people than ever while he's still continuing the murder of civilians in Gaza. Here at home, it's all about the new catchwords. It's like the old global rules-based order. It's all about social cohesion now, and that's why we can't have protests. That's why we've got to shut down freedom of assembly and freedom of speech and interfere in universities and kowtow to petty Zionist victimhood fantasies. Here we are. After 50 peaceful weekend protests against genocide and terrorism in the Middle East. 50 peaceful weekend protests since this time last year. Protests that have been barely covered, despite the many thousands of people demonstrating that have been barely covered in the mainstream media. They've been ignored by the pro-war, pro-Israel mainstream media. And now it's just gone absolutely crazy. It's gone bonkers this week. Because the anniversary of October 7 And the beginning of the genocide is upon us. And the media and politicians are winding up the police and the public for violent protests and violent demonstrations. Murdoch's particularly, have a look. Have a look at this headline. Arrest this hate. New South Wales cops ordered to hunt pro-Hezbollah radicals. A few blokes flying yellow Hezbollah flags. That's what it's all about. But what was actually planned in Sydney? What was this protest for October 7th? Well, that everybody was so riled up about. And the crazies from the Australian Jewish Association, the extremists, they're calling for mosques to be closed and to deport imams, visas to be withdrawn, probably for people who are Australian citizens anyway. It was just a frenzy of paranoia and propaganda this week, which absolutely snowed Albo's shrinkflation. It was a candlelight vigil. That is what had been planned. A candlelight vigil organised by the Palestinian Action Committee. Please join us for a candlelight vigil for Palestine, mourning 12 months of genocide and terrorism on October 7, Sydney Town Hall steps. Now, good point. They could have had it on another day, realising how sensitive this is to the Zionists. But of course, October 7 is the date, and we still don't know. We haven't got to the bottom of what actually happened because there's been no inquiry into what happened. Now, there were Hamas atrocities. Nobody denies that. But how many were killed by IDF? The babies beheaded and the mass rapes, that's all been discredited. So there is extreme question marks behind it. And this is a symbolic date for peace protesters because it's when the genocide began, or the next day at least. So they could have probably had it on the next day. But anyway, it's been an absolute frenzy in the media. So Dutton was out calling for arrests, calling for visas to be withdrawn. The AJA was even calling to call in child services because there was a picture of a child being held and patted by a mother at one of the protests. So they had to call in child services because of the terrorists. The terrorists had babies, said the AJA, and literally said, headlined it, ship them out before they start blowing things up. These peaceful protesters. Terrorist supporters don't belong here, yelled these whack jobs from the AJA, which even the other Zionist organisations believe are not credible. Even the other Zionist organisations believe the AJA is too extreme, and they're doing it on our dime. It's a charity to push Netanyahu. Sydney has fallen. What has Labor done to Australia? And there's poor old Albo, trying to get some cut through with his shrinkflation, those chips. There's not as many chips as there used to be. But we're tempted to give it to Dutton again for his hysteria on wanting to call back Parliament and so on. And there were plenty of other scams this week, but nothing had shade. Nothing even came close to Boris Johnson and AUKUS. Here we are, stitched up with the worst deal in all of history, as Paul Keating called it, because Boris Johnson wanted to get revenge on the French over Brexit. So ScoMo's bought it, wedged Albo, and now we're 380 billion into the tube and going to war with our biggest trading partner. Well, that appears to be the US plan. Scam of the week, Boris Johnson. We don't typically give it to foreign people, the scam of the week, but in this case, ScoMo and Boris. ScoMo has been scammed by Boris, and the entire political class has been scammed as a result on AUKUS. And the mainstream media, of course, still reckons AUKUS is a good deal because these days, the mainstream media, they just toe the line. They have been scammed as well.